The wagon wheel cracked clean through on the rutted trail just outside Brownsville, Texas. And Florence Reeves knew with absolute certainty that her luck had finally run out. She stood in the burning August heat of 1872, staring at the splintered wood and wondering how a woman alone was supposed to fix such a thing, when she barely had the strength left to stand upright. The sun hammered down on her bonnet, and sweat trickled between her shoulder blades, soaking through the already damp fabric of her dress. Her water was running low, her food supplies were nearly gone, and now this. The wagon listed heavily to one side, her few belongings shifting inside with an ominous creak. Florence pressed her palms against the wagon bed and closed her eyes, fighting back tears that would do nothing but waste the moisture her body desperately needed. She was 22 years old, widowed for 3 months, and trying to reach her aunt's homestead another 50 miles north. The journey from New Orleans had already taken everything from her. Her savings depleted by crooked ferry operators and the cost of this barely functional wagon, and the 2 struggling mules that pulled it. A sound made her eyes snap open. Hoofbeats, approaching from the direction she had come. Florence's heart kicked hard against her ribs. She was alone on a desolate stretch of trail with nothing but scrub brush and dust for company. Her hand moved instinctively to the small pistol tucked in her waistband, though she had never fired it and doubted she could hit anything if she tried. The rider came into view around a bend in the trail, and Florence felt her breath catch in her throat. He was massive, sitting astride a paint horse that looked small beneath his frame. As he drew closer, she could see he was dressed in buckskin and leather, with dark hair that fell past his shoulders and a thick beard that framed a sun-bronzed face. His shoulders were impossibly broad, his arms thick with muscle that showed even through his shirt. He looked like he had been carved from the very mountains he must have come from. He reined in his horse a respectful distance away, his eyes taking in the broken wheel, the listing wagon, and Florence herself in one sweeping glance. Those eyes were a startling blue-green, like creek water in summer, and they held an intelligence that put her slightly at ease. "Looks like you have got yourself some trouble," he said, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate in the still air. Florence lifted her chin, trying to summon what remained of her dignity. "The wheel broke. I can manage." One dark eyebrow rose slightly. "Can you now?" "I will figure something out." He dismounted in one fluid motion despite his size, and Florence took an involuntary step backward. He noticed and stopped, holding up one large hand in a peaceful gesture. "Name is Caleb Brennan. I have got a camp about 3 miles north. I can fix your wheel if you will let me." "I do not have money to pay you," Florence said quickly. She hated admitting it, hated the vulnerability of being a woman alone without resources. But she would not let him work under false pretenses. Caleb shrugged, the movement rippling through those broad shoulders. "Did not ask for any." "Then why would you help me?" He looked at her for a long moment, and Florence felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with the Texas sun. "Because you need help, and I can give it. Does not seem complicated to me." Florence bit her lower lip, weighing her options. She could refuse and try to limp into the next town on a broken wheel, likely destroying the wagon completely in the process. Or she could accept help from this stranger and hope he was as decent as he appeared. She had heard too many stories of women who had trusted the wrong person. But something in Caleb Brennan's steady gaze made her want to believe he was different. "All right," she said finally. "Thank you, Mr. Brennan." "Just Caleb." He moved toward the wagon, kneeling to examine the broken wheel. His hands were large and scarred, the hands of a man who worked with them constantly. "This is going to take some time. The whole hub is cracked. I will need to take it back to my camp where I have proper tools. How will we get it there? I will unload your wagon, take off the wheel, and we can make camp here for the night. Tomorrow I will ride back to my place, fix the wheel, and bring it back. Should have you moving again by tomorrow afternoon. A night alone with a strange man on an empty trail. Florence knew she should be terrified, but instead she felt an odd sense of calm settling over her. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe it was the quiet competence in the way Caleb moved and spoke. But she found herself nodding in agreement. I am Florence Reeves. Miss or Mrs.? The question brought a familiar ache to her chest. Mrs. I am a widow. Something flickered in those creek water eyes. Sympathy, perhaps, but he only nodded. I am sorry for your loss. Let us get you set up in some shade before you pass out from this heat. He was right about the heat being dangerous. Florence could feel the way her head had started to swim, the way her vision blurred at the edges. Caleb noticed immediately, his hand steadying her elbow with surprising gentleness for such a large man. When did you last eat? This morning. I had some jerky. That is not enough. Sit. It was not quite in order, but his tone brooked no argument. Florence found herself sinking down onto a flat rock while Caleb efficiently unhitched her mules and led them to a small patch of scrub grass. He moved with the easy confidence of someone completely at home in this harsh landscape. From his saddlebags, he produced strips of dried meat, some hardtack, and a canteen of water that he handed to her. Drink slow, not too much at once. Florence obeyed, the water tasting like salvation as it slid down her parched throat. She watched as Caleb began unloading her wagon, handling her few possessions with a care that touched something deep in her chest. There was not much to unload, just some clothing, a few books she could not bear to part with, her mother's quilt, and the meager supplies that remained. You are traveling light, Caleb observed. I am traveling with what I have left. Florence took a bite of the dried meat, her stomach cramping with sudden hunger. I am heading to my aunt's homestead near San Ignacio. She offered me a place after my husband died. Caleb nodded, setting down a wooden crate with her cooking supplies. That is still a fair piece of traveling. Your husband, what happened to him? Cholera outbreak in New Orleans. He was a clerk at a shipping office. Florence stared at the horizon, remembering those terrible days. It took him in less than a week. We had only been married 8 months. That is hard. Caleb's voice held genuine empathy. You could not stay in New Orleans. We were renting rooms. After he died, I could not afford them. My aunt is my only living family, so I saved what I could and started north. She paused, then added with a bitter laugh, I am beginning to think I should have stayed and found work there instead. You would have made it just fine if not for the wheel. Bad luck, nothing more. Florence watched as he worked, fascinated despite herself by the play of muscle beneath his buckskin shirt. Everything about Caleb Brennan spoke of strength and capability. From the way he hefted the heavy wagon tongue to the efficient movements of his hands as he began removing the broken wheel. This was a man who knew exactly what he was doing. Have you been in these parts long? She asked, more to fill the silence than from real curiosity. About 5 years now. I came down from Colorado, did some trapping up in the Rockies before that. Got tired of the cold winters and decided to see what Texas had to offer. And what does it offer? He glanced at her, a hint of a smile touching his lips beneath that thick beard. Space, quiet. A man can build something here if he has a mind to. What are you building? A life, I suppose. I have got a good camp, a decent trap line, and I trade furs and meat in Brownsville when I need supplies. It is simple, but it suits me. wheel finally came free, and Caleb examined it with a critical eye. "Hub is definitely cracked, and you have got some spokes that need replacing too. But I can fix it. I have done worse repairs than this." Night was falling fast, the way it did in Texas, the sky turning from blazing blue to deep purple in what seemed like moments. Caleb built a fire with practiced ease, and Florence found herself sitting beside it, wrapped in her mother's quilt despite the lingering heat. There was something about fire that made the world feel safer, more contained. Caleb had shot a rabbit earlier, and now it roasted on a spit over the flames, the smell making Florence's mouth water. Real meat, not just dried jerky. Her stomach growled audibly, and she saw that hint of a smile cross Caleb's face again. "Should be ready soon. You do not have to share your food with me. You would rather I eat in front of you while you go hungry?" He shook his head. "What kind of man do you think I am?" "I do not know what kind of man you are. That is rather the point." Caleb studied her across the fire, his face half in shadow. "Fair enough. I suppose you have got no reason to trust me. But I give you my word, Miss Florence. I mean you no harm. I was raised to help folks who need it, and you clearly need it. It is Florence. Just Florence." "All right then. Just Florence." There was warmth in his voice now, something that made her chest feel tight. "I will sleep on the other side of the fire tonight, and I will keep my gun where you can see it. If it makes you feel safer, you keep yours handy too." The simple acknowledgement of her fear, the practical way he addressed it, made Florence feel something shift inside her. "Thank you." They ate in companionable silence, the rabbit tender and flavorful despite the simple preparation. Florence could not remember the last time food had tasted so good. When she finally sat back, her stomach full for the first time in days, she felt tears prick at her eyes from sheer relief. "You all right?" Caleb's voice was gentle. "Yes, I am just tired. It has been a very long few months." "I imagine it has." He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling up into the darkness. "You got any idea what you will do when you reach your aunt's place?" "Help her with the homestead, I suppose. She's getting on in years, and from her letters, I gather she struggles with the work. I am not afraid of hard work." "No, I do not imagine you are. Takes courage to make a journey like this alone." Florence pulled the quilt tighter around her shoulders. "I am not sure it is courage. I did not have another choice. Still counts as courage in my book." Caleb stood, and Florence was struck again by his sheer size. He had to be over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed to span half the night sky. "I am going to check on the animals and then turn in. You should sleep too. Tomorrow is going to be another hot one." He was true to his word, laying out his bedroll on the far side of the fire and placing his gun belt where Florence could clearly see it. She prepared her own sleeping space, using some of her clothing as a pillow, and lay down with her pistol tucked under the makeshift pillow where her hand could easily reach it. But as she stared up at the stars scattered across the Texas sky, Florence found she was not afraid. Caleb's steady breathing from across the fire was oddly comforting, and for the first time since leaving New Orleans, she felt something approaching safe. She woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of Caleb moving around the camp. The sun was just beginning to paint the eastern sky with streaks of pink and gold. Florence sat up, disoriented for a moment before memory returned. "Morning," Caleb said, handing her a tin cup of coffee. "I am going to head out soon to get the wheel fixed. I will leave you some extra food and water. You should stay in the shade as much as possible." Florence accepted the coffee gratefully, the bitter liquid helping to clear the fog from her mind. "How long will you be gone?" "Most of the day, I expect. The work itself will not take too long, but it is a 6-mile ride round trip. I will be back before dark." The thought of being alone all day on this empty trail should have frightened her. But Florence found she was more worried about Caleb not coming back at all. What would she do then, stranded with a broken wagon and dwindling supplies? As if reading her thoughts, Caleb said, "I will be back. You have got my word on that. I believe you." And surprisingly, she did. He saddled his horse and tied the broken wheel securely behind the saddle, then mounted in that same fluid motion she had admired yesterday. "Stay safe, Florence." "You too, Caleb." She watched him ride north until he disappeared into the shimmering heat haze, then turned her attention to making the day bearable. She set up a makeshift shade using one of her blankets and some branches, checked on her mules, and tried to read one of her books. But her mind kept drifting back to Caleb Brennan, to the quiet competence in his hands, the unexpected gentleness in his eyes. Her husband had been a good man, but he had been slight and bookish, more comfortable with ledgers than with physical work. Caleb was his complete opposite in almost every way, and Florence found herself drawn to that difference in a way that made her feel vaguely guilty. Was she betraying her husband's memory by thinking of another man? But surely it was not wrong to appreciate someone's help, to feel gratitude and perhaps a small spark of attraction. The day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Florence dozed in the shade, conserved her water, and tried not to think about what she would do if Caleb did not return. But as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, she heard the sound she had been waiting for all day. Hoofbeats approaching from the north. Caleb rode into view, and Florence felt relief wash over her so powerfully that her knees went weak. He had the repaired wheel tied behind his saddle, and there was a pack of what looked like additional supplies as well. "Told you I would be back," he said, dismounting. "I never doubted it for a moment." It was only a small lie. Caleb's smile was knowing. "Sure you did not, but that is all right. Now let us get this wheel back on your wagon and see if we can have you rolling again." Florence watched as he worked, the muscles in his arms and back flexing with each movement. He had replaced the cracked hub, fitted new spokes, and reinforced the whole thing with strips of metal he must have heated and bent into place. The repair was solid, professional, the work of someone who truly knew his craft. "Where did you learn to do all this?" Florence asked. "My father was a wheelwright back in Pennsylvania. I spent my boyhood in his shop before I got the urge to head west." Caleb fitted the wheel onto the axle, checking the alignment with a critical eye. "Figured the skills would come in handy, and I was right about that. This is beautiful work. It will hold, probably stronger now than it was new." He stood back, wiping his hands on his pants. "That should get you to your aunt's place and beyond." Florence looked at the repaired wagon, then at Caleb, then back at the wagon. She should thank him, wish him well, and continue on her journey. That was the sensible thing to do. But the thought of saying goodbye to him, of watching him ride away, and knowing she would never see him again, made her chest ache in a way she did not fully understand. "How can I ever repay you for this?" she asked. "I told you I do not want payment. But you spent the whole day working on my wheel. You gave me food and water. You have been nothing but kind, and I have nothing to offer in return." Caleb looked at her for a long moment, and Florence saw something shift in his expression. "You could stay for supper. I brought some supplies from my camp, and it has been a while since I had company for a meal. If you are not in too much of a hurry to move on, that is." Florence knew she should say no. She should thank him politely, load up her wagon, and continue north while there was still daylight. But instead she heard herself say, "I would like that very much." The smile that broke across Caleb's face transformed it completely, and Florence felt her heart skip a beat. When was the last time she had made someone smile like that? They made camp again, but this time there was an ease between them that had not existed before. Caleb had brought fresh vegetables from a small garden he maintained near his camp, and he showed Florence how to make a stew in his iron pot that tasted like something from a fancy restaurant rather than a meal cooked over an open fire. "You are a good cook," Florence said, savoring another spoonful. "Living alone, you learn to make food that does not taste like leather, or you go crazy." Caleb added another piece of wood to the fire. "I will admit, though, it is better eating with company." "Do you not get lonely out here?" "Sometimes. But I got used to my own company during the trapping years. Spent whole winters with nobody but myself and the animals." He paused, then added, "It is different now, though. Texas is more settled than the high country. I see folks when I go into town, have some friends I play cards with now and then. It is enough." "Is it?" Florence asked quietly. Caleb met her eyes across the fire. "I thought it was. But maybe I was just telling myself that, because I did not know what I was missing." The weight of those words hung in the air between them. Florence felt her pulse quicken, felt the world narrow down to just the two of them, and the crackling fire and the vast Texas night spreading out around them. "I should continue on tomorrow," she said, but there was no conviction in her voice. "You should," Caleb agreed, "but maybe not at first light. No harm in getting a proper rest first, letting your mules recover some. This heat is hard on them, too." It was a reasonable suggestion, and Florence seized on it gratefully. That makes sense. They talked late into the night, sharing stories from their lives. Florence told him about growing up in New Orleans, the daughter of a seamstress and a dock worker who had died when she was 16. She told him about meeting her husband at a church social, about their brief courtship and briefer marriage, about the dreams they had shared that would never come to pass. Caleb told her about his childhood in Pennsylvania, about running away at 17 to see the Rocky Mountains, about learning to trap and hunt and survive in country that killed men who were not careful. He told her about avalanches and grizzly bears, about nights so cold his breath froze before it left his mouth, about the terrible beauty of a wilderness that cared nothing for human life. "Why did you leave?" Florence asked. "If you loved it so much?" "I got hurt. Bad fall during a hunt. Broke my leg in 3 places and nearly froze to death before my partner found me. Took months to heal, and by the time I could walk again, I realized I did not want to risk dying alone in some snowbank." He stared into the fire. "I wanted to build something that would last, not just survive from season to season, so I came to Texas." "And have you built what you wanted?" "Working on it. I have got a good setup and I have been saving money. I have been thinking about maybe buying some land, building a real house instead of just a camp." He glanced at her. "Sounds foolish, maybe. A mountain man playing at being a homesteader." "It does not sound foolish at all. It sounds like you know what you want." "Maybe. Or maybe I am just figuring it out now." Florence understood what he was not quite saying, felt it echoing in her own chest. Something was happening between them, something that felt inevitable and terrifying all at once. She barely knew this man, and yet she felt more comfortable with him than she had with people she had known for years. When they finally settled down to sleep, Florence lay awake for a long time, listening to the sounds of the night and thinking about roads taken and not taken, about choices and chances, and the strange way life had of throwing people together. Morning came too soon. Florence woke to find Caleb already up, checking the wagon and hitching her mules. The wheel looked solid, the repair seamless. She should be grateful, should be eager to continue her journey. Instead, she felt a heaviness settle over her at the thought of saying goodbye. All set, Caleb said, straightening up. You have got good roads from here to San Ignacio. Should not take you more than 3 or 4 days if the weather holds. Thank you for everything. Florence tried to put all her gratitude into those simple words, but they felt inadequate. Caleb nodded, looking like he wanted to say something, but was not sure how. Finally, he pulled a piece of paper from his pocket and pressed it into her hand. This has got directions to my camp. If you ever need anything, or if things do not work out with your aunt, you come find me. All right? Florence looked down at the paper, at the careful lettering that spelled out landmarks and distances, her vision blurred with sudden tears. All right. I mean it, Florence. You are not alone out here. You have got a friend now if you want one. I want one. The words came out whisper soft. I want more than that, if I am being honest. Caleb went very still. What are you saying? Florence looked up at him, at this mountain of a man who had shown her nothing but kindness, and made a decision that felt like jumping off a cliff. I am saying I do not want to say goodbye to you. I am saying that I have felt more alive in the last 2 days than I have in months, maybe years. I am saying that I am probably crazy, but I cannot seem to make myself get in that wagon and drive away. Florence. Her name was a prayer on his lips. I know it is too fast. I know I am probably being foolish. I am a widow who should be mourning, and you are a stranger I met on a trail, and this makes no sense at all. It makes perfect sense to me. Caleb closed the distance between them in 2 long strides, his hands coming up to cup her face with surprising gentleness. I have been trying to figure out how to ask you to stay, since the moment I saw you. Felt like I got kicked in the chest when you smiled at me last night. I know it is fast, and I know you have got every reason to be careful. But I am asking you anyway. Stay. Just for a while. Let me show you my camp. Let me build you whatever you need. Just stay. Florence felt tears spill down her cheeks, but they were not sad tears. Just stay? That is all I'm asking. Just stay, and we will figure out the rest as we go. She should say no. She should be practical, should think about her reputation and her future, and all the sensible reasons why this was a terrible idea. But Florence Reeves had been sensible her entire life, and where had it gotten her? Widowed and nearly destitute, alone on a hard road with nothing but hope to sustain her. All right, she said. I will stay. The kiss that followed was gentle at first, almost tentative, as if Caleb was afraid she might shatter. But Florence pressed closer, her hands fisting in his buckskin shirt, and the kiss deepened into something that made her head spin and her knees go weak. He tasted like coffee and morning and possibility, and when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Florence knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. Caleb's camp turned out to be much more than she had expected. It was not just a campsite, but a proper homestead in the making, nestled in a valley where a small creek provided fresh water year-round. He had built a sturdy cabin with a stone fireplace, a lean-to for his horses, and a smokehouse for preserving meat. There was the small garden he had mentioned, and a cleared area where he was clearly planning to expand. I know it is not much, Caleb said, suddenly seeming almost shy as he showed her around. It is wonderful, Florence said honestly. You built all this yourself? Most of it. Had some help with the cabin raising from men in town, but the rest is my doing. He opened the door to the cabin, and Florence stepped inside, her eyes widening. The interior was simple but well made, with a proper bed frame, a table and chairs, shelves for supplies, and even a rocking chair positioned near the fireplace. The floor was smooth planks, and there were hooks on the walls for hanging things. It was the home of a man who intended to stay, who was building something permanent. You can have the cabin, Caleb said quickly. I will sleep in the lean-to with the horses. I do not want you to feel like I expect anything just because you are here. Florence turned to look at him, at this giant of a man who was trying so hard to be respectful, and felt her heart swell with affection. I trust you, Caleb. You have already proven you are a good man. Over the following days, they fell into an easy routine. Caleb taught Florence how to fish in the creek, how to identify which plants were edible and which would make you sick, how to read the weather in the way the animals behaved. Florence taught him how to make bread that did not taste like rocks, how to mend his clothes so they would actually last, how to make his cabin feel more like a home. They talked endlessly, learning each other's histories and dreams and fears. Florence told him about her mother's death from yellow fever, about the loneliness of her marriage to a man who had been kind but distant, about her terror at being left alone in the world with no resources. Caleb told her about the brother he had lost to smallpox, about the guilt he felt for leaving his aging parents to seek adventure, about the years he had spent convinced he was meant to live and die alone. I figured I was too rough for civilized life, he admitted one evening as they sat by the creek, watching the water flow past. Too used to my own company, too set in my ways. What woman would want a man who smells like deer hide and does not know how to make small talk at a church social? This woman, Florence said softly. This woman would want exactly that man. Caleb turned to her, the setting sun painting him in shades of gold. Florence, I need you to know something. I am falling in love with you. Maybe already have fallen. I know it is fast, and I know you might need more time. But I wanted you to know where I stand. Florence's breath caught in her throat. She had known this moment was coming, had felt it building with every shared smile, every accidental touch, every evening spent talking by the fire. But hearing the words still made her heart race. I'm falling in love with you too, she admitted. It terrifies me how much I feel after such a short time. But I cannot deny it. When I am with you, I feel like I can breathe for the first time in years. Then stay, Caleb said, taking her hand in his. Not just for a while. Stay for good. Let me build you whatever you need. A bigger cabin, a better garden, whatever would make you happy. Just stay and we will build a life together. What about my aunt? She is expecting me. We can send her a letter. Let her know you are safe and have made other plans. If you want, we can even go visit her so she knows you are all right and I am not some scoundrel who kidnapped you. Florence laughed through sudden tears. She is going to think I have lost my mind. Have you? Completely. But I do not care. She leaned into him, feeling the solid strength of his body against hers. Yes, Caleb, I will stay. I will stay forever if you will have me. His kiss was her answer, deep and passionate and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both flushed and breathing hard, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. I am going to marry you, Florence Reeves, soon as I can get us to a preacher. Is that a proposal? It is a statement of intent, but if you want it proper. He slid off the rock where they had been sitting and dropped to one knee in the dirt beside the creek. Florence Reeves, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I cannot promise you riches or fancy things, but I can promise I will love you and protect you and work every day to make you happy. I can promise I will build you whatever you need, and I will never leave you alone again. What do you say?" Florence looked down at this mountain of a man, this gentle giant who had appeared in her life at exactly the moment she needed him most, and felt joy burst through her like sunshine. "I say yes, yes, absolutely yes." They rode into Brownsville 3 days later, Caleb on his paint horse and Florence driving her wagon. They visited the general store first, where Caleb bought supplies for the cabin, and Florence picked out fabric for curtains and a new dress. News traveled fast in a small town, and by the time they reached the church, half the population seemed to know that the mountain man was getting married. The preacher was a weathered man named Reverend Collins, who had known Caleb for several years. He looked surprised to see him standing in the church doorway with a woman. But his surprise quickly turned to pleasure. "Caleb Brennan, is that really you? And who is this lovely lady?" "This is Florence Reeves, and we would like to get married. Today, if you have got time." Reverend Collins blinked. "Today? Son, do not you think you should court the lady a bit first?" "Already did the courting," Caleb said firmly, his hand warm on Florence's lower back. "Now, we want to make it official." Florence stepped forward. "I know it seems sudden, Reverend, but I promise you this is what we both want. I would marry him right this moment if I could." The preacher studied them both, then slowly smiled. "Well, I will be. All right then, let us get you two married. But we need witnesses. Let me fetch my wife and the sheriff." The ceremony was simple, but perfect. Florence stood beside Caleb in her travel-worn dress, wishing she had something nicer to wear, but not caring enough to delay. Caleb held her hands in his grip steady and sure, and spoke his vows in that deep rumble of a voice that made her shiver. "I, Caleb Brennan, take you, Florence Reeves, to be my wife. I promise to love you, honor you, and protect you all the days of my life. I promise to build you whatever you need and to never leave you alone. I promise to be yours, completely and forever." Florence's voice shook as she spoke her own vows. "I, Florence Reeves, take you, Caleb Brennan, to be my husband. I promise to love you, honor you, and stand beside you through whatever comes. I promise to make our house a home and to be yours, completely and forever." When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Caleb kissed her with a tenderness that made Florence's eyes prick with tears. She was married again, but this time it felt completely different. This time it felt like coming home to a place she had never been, but had always belonged. They spent their wedding night in a hotel room in Brownsville. And if Florence had worried about the intimacy with a man she had known for such a short time, those worries evaporated the moment Caleb gathered her into his arms. He was patient and gentle, attentive to her needs, and when they finally came together, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. Afterward, lying in his arms with her head on his broad chest, Florence felt a peace she had never known. "No regrets?" Caleb asked softly, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "Not a single one. You? Only that I did not meet you sooner." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I am going to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." "I already know I will not." They returned to the cabin the next day, and Florence threw herself into making it truly theirs. She hung the curtains she had bought, arranged their few possessions to make the space more welcoming, and planted herbs in the garden. Caleb began work on an addition to the cabin, wanting to give them more room before winter came. Florence wrote to her aunt, explaining what had happened and assuring her that she was safe and happy. The response came 6 weeks later, and to Florence's relief, her aunt was thrilled rather than scandalized. She wrote that she was happy Florence had found love again, and that she would look forward to meeting Caleb when they could make the journey north. As summer turned to fall, Florence discovered she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but when her courses failed to come for the second month in a row, she knew for certain. The news filled her with both joy and terror. Her first marriage had been childless, and she had begun to think perhaps she could not conceive. Now, married to Caleb for less than 3 months, she was carrying his child. She told him that evening as they sat by the fire after supper. Caleb had been whittling a new handle for one of his knives, but at her words, the knife and wood both clattered to the floor. "You're sure?" His voice was rough with emotion. "As sure as I can be without seeing a doctor. But I know the signs, Caleb. I am pregnant." He pulled her into his arms so suddenly she let out a startled laugh. "A baby. We are going to have a baby." "You are happy?" Florence asked, even though she could feel the joy radiating from him. Happy does not even begin to cover it. He pulled back to look at her face, his eyes shining in the firelight. "You have given me everything, Florence. A home, a wife, and now a child. I never thought I would have any of this." "I never thought I would either. But here we are." "Here we are," he agreed, kissing her softly. "I am going to take such good care of you. Both of you. I promise." And he kept that promise. As Florence's belly grew round with her child, Caleb was attentive to her every need. He finished the addition to the cabin, giving them a proper bedroom and a nursery for the baby. He made her rest when she was tired, brought her wild berries when she craved something sweet, and rubbed her aching back at the end of each day. Winter came early that year, bringing cold winds and occasional frost. Caleb made sure they had plenty of firewood stacked and meat preserved, and he reinforced the cabin against the weather. On the coldest nights, they would lie together in their bed, Caleb's large hand resting on Florence's belly, feeling their child move and kick. "It is strong," he said one night, feeling a particularly vigorous kick. "Takes after you." "Takes after both of us," Florence corrected. "This baby is going to be stubborn and independent, just like its father. And beautiful and brave, just like its mother." Florence smiled in the darkness. "Do you hope for a boy or a girl?" "I do not care, as long as you both come through healthy. Though I will admit, the thought of a little girl with your eyes is appealing. And I think a son with your strength and kindness would be wonderful." "We will love whatever we get," Caleb said firmly. "And then we will make a few more, if you are willing. I like the idea of a full house, children running around and making noise." "I think I would like that too." Florence went into labor on a cold February morning in 1873. Caleb rode to town to fetch the midwife, a capable woman named Mrs. Henderson, who had delivered half the babies in the county. Florence labored through the day and into the night, Caleb by her side the entire time, letting her squeeze his hands until she was certain she was breaking bones. "You are doing so well," he kept saying, his voice steady despite the fear she could see in his eyes. "You are the strongest person I know, Florence. You can do this." And she did. Just before dawn, their son was born, red-faced and squalling, with a thick shock of dark hair and his father's sturdy build already apparent. Caleb cut the cord with shaking hands, tears streaming down his face as Mrs. Henderson placed the baby in Florence's arms. "Hello, little one," Florence whispered, exhausted but euphoric. "Welcome to the world." "He is perfect," Caleb breathed, gently touching one tiny fist. "Florence, he is absolutely perfect." They named him Connor, after Caleb's brother who had died. and the cabin filled with the sounds of new life. Caleb proved to be a devoted father, rising in the night to walk with Connor when he cried, changing diapers without complaint, and staring at his son with an expression of such wonder that it made Florence's heart ache with love. "I never knew," he said one evening, holding Connor while Florence prepared supper. "I never knew I could feel like this about another person, like my heart is walking around outside my body." "That is exactly what it is like," Florence agreed. "Every time I look at him, I feel it too." As Connor grew from an infant to a toddler, Florence and Caleb's life together deepened and strengthened. They built routines and traditions, celebrating holidays and birthdays, working together to improve their homestead. Caleb taught Connor to ride almost as soon as the boy could walk, and Florence taught him his letters using a battered primer she had brought from New Orleans. True to his word, Caleb built Florence whatever she needed. When she mentioned wanting to try keeping chickens, he built a sturdy coop. When she talked about missing music, he traded furs for a second-hand fiddle and taught himself to play, filling their evenings with clumsy but heartfelt melodies. When she expressed a desire to have a proper bathing room, he spent weeks designing and building an addition with a copper tub he had hauled all the way from Brownsville. "You said you would build me what I needed," Florence said, standing in the finished bathing room and fighting back tears. "But this is beyond need, Caleb. This is luxury." "You deserve luxury," he said simply. "You deserve everything I can give you. All I need is you. That was always all I needed." Connor was 3 when Florence discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, her body knowing what to expect, and she continued working around the homestead almost until the day her labor started. Their second child was born in the spring, another boy they named Cameron, who had Florence's auburn hair and Caleb's blue-green eyes. 2 sons, Caleb said, holding Cameron while Connor climbed onto his lap to peer at his new brother. "I am the luckiest man alive." "Do you want to try for a girl?" Florence asked. "I want whatever you want. If you are happy with our 2 boys, then so am I. If you want to try for more, I am certainly not going to complain." His grin was wicked, and Florence laughed, swatting his arm. "We will see how I feel after this one is sleeping through the night." But Florence did want more children, and over the next several years, their family grew. A daughter named Catherine arrived when Cameron was 2, and she was indeed the perfect blend of her parents, with Caleb's strong features softened by Florence's delicate bone structure. Twin boys, Charles and Christopher, came 3 years later, causing chaos and joy in equal measure. And finally, when Florence was 33 and Caleb was 36, their youngest daughter Faith was born, completing their family at 6 children. The cabin had expanded to match their family, with additions and improvements made each year. What had started as Caleb's simple mountain camp was now a thriving homestead with a proper house, a barn, livestock, and fields of crops. They had become fixtures in the Brownsville community, known and respected, their children growing up strong and happy. Caleb never returned to trapping, finding that farming and raising his family brought him more satisfaction than he had ever found in the wilderness. His massive frame was perfect for the heavy work of homesteading, and he taught his sons to be strong and capable, while also teaching them the gentleness he showed their mother. Florence bloomed in her role as wife and mother, finding strengths she had never known she possessed. She managed their household with quiet efficiency, taught her children reading and arithmetic, and became known in town for her healing remedies and willingness to help neighbors in need. The frightened widow who had broken down on a dusty trail seemed like someone from another lifetime. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Caleb surprised Florence by taking her back to the spot where they had met, where her wagon wheel had broken all those years ago. He had arranged for the children to stay with neighbors, giving them a rare day alone together. "I wanted to remind you of where we started," he said, spreading a blanket on the ground near where her wagon had listed to one side. "And to thank you." "Thank me? For what?" "For staying. For taking a chance on a rough mountain man who did not know the first thing about courting a woman properly. For building this life with me." He pulled her into his arms. "These 10 years have been the best of my life, Florence. Every single day with you is a gift." Florence looked up at her husband, at the silver starting to thread through his dark hair and beard, at the lines around his eyes from years of smiling and squinting in the sun. He was still the strongest man she had ever known, still capable of making her heart race with a single look. "I think about that day sometimes," she said. "About what would have happened if you had not come along. If I had tried to continue on alone." "You would have managed. You are stronger than you think." "Maybe. But I am so grateful I did not have to. I am grateful for every moment of every day we have had together. You gave me everything, Caleb. A home, a family, love beyond anything I ever imagined. You built me exactly what I needed." "I tried to," he said softly. "But you did the same for me. You gave me a reason to stop wandering, a reason to put down roots. You made me believe I could be more than just a man surviving from season to season." They made love there on the blanket, under the vast Texas sky, and it felt both familiar and new. The passion of their early days combined with the deep intimacy of a decade together. Afterwards, lying in each other's arms, Florence felt perfectly content. "I love you," she said. "With everything I am, I love you." "I love you too. Always have, always will." As their children grew older, the homestead became a gathering place for the community. Florence's reputation as a healer brought people seeking help for ailments, and Caleb's strength and skill made him the person neighbors called when they needed help with difficult work. Their home was always full of laughter and activity, and Florence could not imagine wanting anything different. Connor grew tall and strong like his father, with a serious nature and a gift for working with animals. He began helping train horses when he was just 14. And by 16, he had a reputation throughout the county for being able to gentle even the wildest mustangs. Cameron was the scholar of the family, constantly reading everything he could get his hands on and talking about becoming a teacher someday. Catherine was adventurous and fearless, more comfortable in the barn than the kitchen, much to Florence's amused acceptance. The twins were inseparable troublemakers who kept everyone on their toes, and little Faith was the baby everyone adored, with a sunny disposition that could brighten the darkest day. Caleb taught all his children to ride and shoot, to track and hunt, to read the land and weather. But he also taught them gentleness and compassion, showing them through his actions how a strong man could also be kind. He was patient with their mistakes and generous with praise, and Florence often found herself watching him with their children and falling in love with him all over again. Years passed in the way they do when life is good, faster than seemed possible. Florence's auburn hair gained streaks of silver, and Caleb's beard turned increasingly white. Their children began leaving home one by one. Connor marrying a rancher's daughter and starting his own spread. Cameron heading east to attend college with money his parents had painstakingly saved. Catherine shocking everyone by becoming a deputy sheriff in a neighboring county. Where did the time go? Florence asked one evening, sitting on the porch of their home with Caleb beside her. The twins had just left for town, and Faith was inside doing her schoolwork. The house felt too quiet. "I do not know," Caleb admitted. "Seems like yesterday I was teaching Connor to ride, and now he has got 2 children of his own." Do you ever regret it? The life we built here? Do you ever miss the mountains and the freedom? Caleb turned to look at her, his weathered face creasing in a smile. Not for a single second. This life, this family, you, this is everything I never knew I was looking for. The mountains were beautiful, and I am glad I saw them. But they were never home. Home is wherever you are, Florence. She leaned against his shoulder, still fitting perfectly against his side after all these years. I feel the same way. That day my wheel broke was the best bad luck I ever had. And the day I decided to ride south instead of north was the best decision I ever made. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the land they had built their life on. Faith came outside eventually, settling on the porch steps with a book. And Florence felt a wave of contentment wash over her. This was everything she had never known to wish for. This simple, profound happiness. More years passed, and the homestead saw the next generation of children running through its rooms. Connor and his wife brought their children to visit regularly, and Cameron returned from college with a wife of his own, a teacher like he had become, and they settled in Brownsville to open a school. Catherine eventually married a fellow lawman, much to everyone's relief that she had found someone who could match her fierce independence. The twins went into business together, opening a freight company that quickly became successful. And Faith, their baby, married a doctor and moved to San Antonio, though she visited as often as she could. Florence and Caleb grew old together, their bodies slowing but their love never diminishing. Caleb's hair and beard turned completely white, and his massive frame finally began to show the wear of decades of hard work. Florence's hands became gnarled with arthritis, making her fine needlework difficult, and her once quick steps became careful and measured. But they still danced in their kitchen when the mood struck them, Caleb humming a tune while Florence laughed and protested that her dancing days were behind her. They still sat on their porch every evening, watching the sunset and talking about their day. They still shared a bed every night, falling asleep in each other's arms the way they had for 40 years. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children and grandchildren gathered at the homestead for a celebration. The house was full to bursting with 3 generations of the family that had started with a broken wagon wheel and an offer of help. There was food and laughter and music. And at the center of it all were Caleb and Florence, aged but still clearly deeply in love. Connor stood to make a toast. His own children gathered around him. To my parents, who taught me what real love looks like, who showed me that strength and gentleness are not opposites, but partners, who built not just this homestead, but a legacy of family and community that will last for generations. Thank you for everything you have given us. Happy anniversary. The gathered family raised their glasses, and Florence felt tears spill down her weathered cheeks. Caleb's arm was around her shoulders, solid and sure as it had always been. I cannot believe we built all this, Florence whispered to him. We did, though. Together. He kissed her temple. And I would do it all again, every moment, just to end up right here with you. As the party wound down and their children and grandchildren slowly departed, promising to visit soon, Florence and Caleb found themselves alone again on their porch, the stars brilliant overhead. Do you remember what you said to me that first day? Florence asked. When my wagon broke down? I said a lot of things that day. You said you could build me what I needed. That is what you offered, to fix my wheel and help me continue my journey. And you said to just stay. Caleb finished, the memory clearly as vivid for him as it was for her. You said just stay, and I knew right then that I was never leaving you again. You kept that promise. You never left. How could I? You are my home, Florence. You always have been. Florence leaned against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart, the warmth of his body, the strength that had never failed her in 4 decades. And you are mine. My home, my heart, my everything. They sat together in the darkness. 2 people who had found each other on a dusty trail when they both needed it most. A mountain man who had offered to build what was needed, and a widow who had asked him to stay. And in that staying, in that choosing each other day after day for 40 years, they had built something far more valuable than any physical structure. They had built a love that would endure long after they were gone, living on in their children and grandchildren, in the stories that would be told about the mountain man and the woman whose wagon broke down at exactly the right moment, in the homestead that stood as a testament to what could be created when 2 people chose each other and never looked back. As they finally rose to go inside, moving slowly but together, Florence looked back at the land spread out around their home. This was what Caleb had built for her, with his strength and his love and his unwavering dedication. But it was also what she had built for him, with her courage and her heart and her willingness to take a chance on a rough stranger who had turned out to be the greatest blessing of her life. Just stay, she had said, and he never left her again. The years continued to roll by, gentler now, with Caleb and Florence settling into a peaceful rhythm of their later years. Their homestead, which had once rung with the sounds of young children, now welcomed grandchildren and great-grandchildren who ran through the same rooms their parents had played in decades before. Caleb was 72 when his body finally began to truly slow. A lifetime of hard work in the mountains and on the homestead had taken its toll, and there were mornings when his joints protested getting out of bed. But he never complained, and Florence, at 68, was right beside him, her hand still gentle as she rubbed liniment into his aching shoulders. "We're getting old," he observed one morning, watching her move around their bedroom with the same careful steps he now took. "We earned it," Florence replied, helping him with his shirt. "Every single year of it." They had handed over most of the work of the homestead to Connor's family, who had moved into a newly built house on the property to help manage things. Connor was in his 40s now, with children nearly grown themselves, and he ran the farm with the same dedication his father had shown. But Caleb still insisted on doing what he could, tending his beloved garden and working with the horses when his body allowed. Florence had finally given up most of her healing work, her hands too stiff to grind herbs and mix remedies the way she once had. But neighbors still came to visit, seeking her advice and wisdom, and she was happy to share what she had learned over 5 decades in Texas. They celebrated their 45th anniversary with a quiet dinner, just the 2 of them in the home they had built together. Their children had offered to come, but Caleb and Florence had insisted they wanted this milestone to be private. 45 years, Florence marveled, looking at Caleb across the table he had built with his own hands so long ago. Almost half a century. "Best 45 years any man could ask for," Caleb said, raising his glass of wine. "To you, Florence Brennan, the woman who saved my life by asking me to stay." "To us," Florence corrected, "to the life we built together." That night, lying in bed with the window open to the cool evening breeze, Florence traced the familiar map of scars on Caleb's chest and arms, each one a story she knew by heart. His hands, still large and strong despite the arthritis that plagued them, cradled her face with infinite tenderness. "I love you," he said, the words as heartfelt as they had been 4.5 decades ago. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you, always and forever." They made love slowly, gently, with the deep familiarity of a lifetime together. It was different from the passion of their youth, but no less meaningful, perhaps even more so for all the years and experiences that had deepened their bond. The seasons changed, and Florence and Caleb moved through them together. They saw Cameron's children graduate from his school. They attended Catherine's retirement party when she finally stepped down as sheriff after 20 years of service. They celebrated the twins' success as their freight company expanded across Texas. They welcomed Faith home for visits, her children grown now and starting families of their own. Winter came with a cold snap that was unusual for southern Texas. Florence worried about Caleb, who seemed more affected by the cold than he ever had been. She made sure he stayed inside by the fire, brought him hot soup and tea, and sat with him reading aloud from the books they both loved. "I am not an invalid," he protested, though his cough told a different story. "I know you are not. But humor me anyway." Florence set aside her book and moved to sit beside him, taking his hand in hers. "We have earned the right to be cautious with each other, Caleb. Let me take care of you the way you have always taken care of me." His expression softened. "All right. But only because I like having you fuss over me." "Liar. You have always hated being fussed over." "Maybe I have changed in my old age." The cold spell passed, and Caleb rallied, insisting he was fine and had just caught a minor chill. But Florence noticed he tired more easily now, that he spent more afternoons dozing in his rocking chair than working outside. She said nothing, not wanting to worry him, but she felt a cold finger of fear touch her heart. Spring arrived with its usual burst of wildflowers, and Florence insisted they take walks every day, short ones that would not overtax Caleb but would keep him moving and engaged. They walked hand in hand through the land they knew so well, pointing out changes and remembering how things had been in years past. "Remember when this was all scrub brush?" Caleb asked, gesturing at a field now planted with wheat. "Before Connor cleared it? I remember thinking we would never need that much land. Now I cannot imagine the homestead without it." "Everything grows," Caleb said thoughtfully. "If you tend it right, everything grows." They stopped at the creek where Caleb had taught their children to fish, where Florence had spent countless summer afternoons watching them play. The water still flowed clear and cool, just as it had 50 years ago when Caleb had first shown her this valley. "This is my favorite spot," Florence said, sitting on the bank. "I think it always has been." "Mine too." Caleb settled beside her with a grunt, his joints protesting. "I used to come here when I first built my camp, before I met you. I would sit here and wonder what I was doing with my life, if there was something more I should be reaching for. And then you found me." "And then I found you," he agreed. "Or maybe you found me. Either way, I stopped wondering and started living." Florence leaned her head against his shoulder, and they sat in silence, listening to the creek and the birds and the wind in the trees. These moments had become more precious to her lately. This quiet time with a man who had been her partner through every joy and sorrow. They celebrated their 47th anniversary in the summer, with a smaller gathering this time. Caleb seemed tired, and Florence kept the party short, ushering their well-meaning children and grandchildren out earlier than usual. "They worry about us," Caleb observed once they were alone. "They love us. It is the same thing." "Are you worried about me, Florence?" She considered lying, then decided against it. They had always been honest with each other. "Yes. You are not as strong as you were, and it scares me. I am 74 years old. I am not supposed to be as strong as I was." He pulled her close. "But I am not going anywhere yet. I have got more years left in me." Promise? I promise. I told you a long time ago I would never leave you again, and I meant it. Fall arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and the busy work of harvest. Caleb insisted on helping, though Florence and Connor both tried to convince him to rest. He worked until he was exhausted, then collapsed into bed each night, asleep almost before his head hit the pillow. He's going to work himself to death, Florence told Connor one afternoon, watching Caleb from the window. I know, Mama. But you know how he is. He does not know how to stop. Yes, he does. He just does not want to. Florence sighed. He thinks if he keeps working, if he stays useful, he will not get old. But we are old, whether he wants to admit it or not. Winter came again, and this time Caleb could not shake the cough that settled in his chest. Florence nursed him through weeks of illness, sitting by his bedside, bringing him broth and medicine, reading to him when he was too weak to hold a book himself. You should get some rest. He rasped one night, his voice rough from coughing. You are going to wear yourself out. I am fine. You just focus on getting better. Florence. He caught her hand, his grip weaker than she had ever felt it. We need to talk about what happens if I do not get better. You will? You have to. I might not. I am 74, and I have lived a good long life. If my time comes, stop it. Florence's voice broke. Do not talk like that. You promised me more years. I know I did, and I meant it. But I am also a practical man, and I want you to know that if something happens to me, I am at peace. I have had the best life any man could ask for, all because of you. You gave me everything, Florence, everything that matters. Tears streamed down her face. You gave me everything too. You saved me, Caleb. That day on the trail, you saved my life in every way that matters. Then we are even. He managed a weak smile. But I am not giving up. I am going to fight this, because I am not ready to leave you yet. And he did fight, with every ounce of his considerable stubbornness. Slowly, painfully, he recovered from the illness, though it left him weaker than before. When spring came, he could no longer take their daily walks, instead sitting on the porch and watching the world come back to life. Florence adjusted to their new limitations, finding joy in the small things. The way Caleb smiled when the grandchildren visited, the feel of his hand in hers as they sat together, the stories they shared in the evenings. She photographed every moment in her memory, storing them away against a future she did not want to think about but knew was coming. Their 48th anniversary was quiet, celebrated on the porch with their children gathered around. Caleb was frail now, his once massive frame diminished by age and illness, but his eyes still held that spark of love when he looked at Florence. 48 years, he said, his voice soft but clear. And I would do it all again in a heartbeat. So would I, Florence whispered, kissing his weathered cheek. Summer passed into fall, and Caleb continued to weaken. He spent most of his time in bed now, with Florence constantly at his side. Their children took turns visiting, bringing grandchildren and great-grandchildren to say hello, to sit with the patriarch of their family and hear his stories one more time. On a cool October evening, with the sunset painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Caleb called Florence to his bedside. She had been dozing in a chair nearby, exhausted from weeks of caregiving, but she came instantly alert at the sound of his voice. I am here, she said, taking his hand. I can see them, Caleb said, his eyes focused on something she could not see. My parents, my brother, they are waiting for me. Caleb, no, please, I am not ready. His eyes focused on her face, and the love in them was so profound, It took her breath away. I love you, Florence Brennan. Loving you has been the greatest privilege of my life. I love you too. So much. Too much. I do not know how to be without you. You do. You are the strongest person I have ever known. You will be fine. His grip on her hand tightened slightly. Thank you for asking me to stay. Thank you for 48 years of happiness. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for building me what I needed. You gave me everything, Caleb. Everything. I tried my best. His breathing was growing shallower. Tell our children I love them. Tell them to take care of you. They will, but you can tell them yourself. You are going to be fine. But even as she said it, Florence knew it was not true. She could see him slipping away, could feel his hand growing colder in hers. Stay, she whispered, the word that had bound them together so long ago. Please stay. I promised I would never leave you, Caleb said, his voice barely audible now. And I am not. I will be with you always, Florence, always. His eyes closed, and his breathing stilled, and Florence felt her heart shatter into 1,000 pieces. She laid her head on his chest, on the broad expanse that had always been her safe harbor, and wept. Connor found her there hours later, still holding his father's hand, still whispering words of love to a man who could no longer hear them. He gently led his mother away, calling for his siblings, gathering the family to mourn the man who had built their world. The funeral was attended by half the county, testament to the impact Caleb Brennan had made in his 50 years in Texas. They buried him in a plot on the homestead, overlooking the creek he had loved, under the vast sky he had lived beneath for so long. Florence stood at the graveside, supported by her children, and felt like half of herself had been buried with him. The weeks after Caleb's death were the hardest of Florence's life. She moved through each day mechanically, eating when her children insisted, sleeping when exhaustion finally claimed her, but feeling like she was only half alive. The homestead felt empty without him, even filled with family. Every room held memories of Caleb, every corner echoed with his laughter and his voice. But slowly, gradually, Florence began to heal. She realized that Caleb had been right. She was stronger than she thought. And more than that, she realized he was still with her, in the house he had built, in the children they had raised, in the life they had created together. She began to find joy again in small things. The way her great-grandchildren reminded her of Caleb, all sturdy strength and gentle hearts. The stories her children told about their father, keeping his memory alive. The feeling of the wood beneath her hands as she touched the furniture he had made, the walls he had raised, the home he had built for her. Florence lived for another 7 years, dying peacefully in her sleep at the age of 77. In those years, she became the family's historian, writing down stories of Caleb and their life together, making sure future generations would know about the mountain man who had offered to build what was needed, and the widow who had asked him to stay. They buried her beside Caleb, under a stone that read, "Together forever, as they always were." And if the people at the funeral spoke of how beautiful the service was, how Florence had lived a long and remarkable life, they also spoke of the love story that had begun with a broken wagon wheel and had lasted beyond death. The homestead remained in the family, passed down through generations, each one adding to what Caleb and Florence had started. The house expanded and modernized, but the original cabin remained at its heart, preserved as a reminder of where it all began. The creek still flowed clear, children still learned to fish in its waters, and on quiet evenings, if you listened closely, you might almost hear the sound of a deep voice humming while a woman laughed. Connor, before he died at the age of 86, told his own grandchildren the story of how their great-grandparents met. He told them about the mountain man who rode down a dusty trail and found a woman with a broken wagon and a broken spirit, how he offered to build her what she needed, how she had the courage to ask him to stay, and how he kept his promise to never leave her again. That is what love looks like, Connor would say. Not the easy kind, not the kind you see in storybooks, but the real kind, the kind that builds something lasting, the kind that takes two people and creates a family, a home, a legacy. That is what your great-grandparents had, and that is what they have given all of us. And so the story was passed down, generation after generation, the tale of Caleb and Florence Brennan, the mountain man and the widow who found each other at exactly the right moment and built a love that would last forever. In the end, Caleb had indeed built Florence what she needed. Not just a repaired wagon wheel or a cabin or all the physical structures that made up their homestead. He had built her a life, a family, a love so profound it transcended death. He had built her security and joy and purpose, had shown her that strength and gentleness could coexist, that taking a chance on someone could lead to everything you never knew you wanted. And Florence had given him the same gifts in return. By asking him to stay, by taking the risk of trusting a stranger, she had given him roots and purpose and a reason to stop wandering. She had given him a home not just in a physical place, but in her heart, had shown him that he was worthy of love and capable of building something that would outlast him. Their story became legend in the family, the foundation upon which every other love story was measured. When young couples doubted themselves, when marriages hit rough patches, when life felt overwhelming, they would remember Caleb and Florence. Remember that true love was built day by day, choice by choice, sacrifice by sacrifice. Remember that the greatest things in life often started with the smallest moments. A broken wheel, an offer of help, a simple request to stay. The homestead still stands today, over a century and a half later, maintained by the descendants of Caleb and Florence Brennan. The original cabin is a museum now, filled with artifacts from their lives. Caleb's tools, Florence's quilts, photographs of their children and grandchildren, letters they wrote to each other during the brief times they were apart. Visitors come from all over to see the place where this great love story unfolded, to walk the land they walked, to stand by the creek where they made so many memories. But more than the physical place, what endures is the lesson they left behind. That love, real lasting love, is not about grand gestures or perfect circumstances. It is about showing up every day and choosing each other, about building something together brick by brick, moment by moment. It is about a mountain man who said he would build what was needed, and a woman brave enough to ask him to stay, and two people who kept their promises to each other until death and beyond. In a world that often feels temporary and uncertain, the story of Caleb and Florence Brennan stands as a reminder that some things do last forever. That love built on trust and respect and genuine partnership can weather any storm. That sometimes the best things in life come from taking a chance on a stranger who turns out to be exactly what you needed all along. And so their legacy lives on, not just in the land they settled or the house they built or the children they raised, but in the inspiration they provide to everyone who hears their story. A mountain man and a widow, a broken wagon wheel and an offer of help, a simple request to stay, and a promise to never leave. From such humble beginnings, they built something extraordinary. They built a love story for the ages.